everyone. Happy Monday. So on Friday, we discussed the movie Leave the World Behind. And I've got to say, okay, we went over that scene with the self-driving Teslas like crashing into each other that clogged up that bridge. So like no one could leave, which was, oh my God, that gave me so much anxiety. Well, what are the odds that right after this movie comes out, 2 million Teslas get recalled for self-driving safety concerns? It's like you can't even make this shit up. I'm like, are you kidding me? But no, it's real. This is really happening.
Yeah, I read an article in a publication called Auto Evolution, and it was talking about a Tesla that ran over an electrical box at McDonald's in Colorado last weekend. And the driver's claiming that she had to crash her Tesla into an electrical box because it refused to be overridden and it kept driving autonomously even after the car was towed away. And like, according to this article, the owner of the Tesla said both her feet were on the floor. She was in the drive-through. And like all of a sudden, the car started going 70 miles an hour from the drive-through window. And she explained that she had to, quote, get the front axle off the ground so it could spin freely without running all over the place, end quote. And so she like purposely steered the car towards the electrical box. And the article also said, quote, the Tesla Model Y did not stop even when it was unloaded from the tow truck. It kept trying to go all night in the yard where it was towed, and they finally had to cut all the wires that made it go anywhere. Photos from the scene were posted by the Fort Lupton Fire Department. After the preliminary investigation, they confirmed what the driver said, end quote. And I saw the pictures that were with the article. And of course, the article also mentions how this happened literally right after the Netflix movie came out.
It's really scary. Like, it's funny, but it's scary when you think about
Right?
how Biden has said so many times he wants all electric vehicles and how what if they just program them to all go either crash each other or go to these like FEMA camps? Like there's so many things that come to mind. And then, God forbid, like AI get into the system and try to take it over. So it really is something that, yeah, we should not have that, or at least like we should think this through a little bit more.
Yeah.
So at least they're doing a recall. Maybe that'll fix it. I don't know. But speaking of electric vehicles, remember that massive infrastructure bill that was passed last year with the Biden administration that like really wasn't for infrastructure? Well, I guess $7 billion was spent by the Biden administration to build electric charging stations across the country. And not even one single charging station has actually been built. So, like, where did that $7 billion go? We don't know. Only one can imagine, but it sure as hell didn't go to build in the charging stations that it was supposed to. And it's just crazy because it's like that movie comes out and everyone's freaking out. And then did you see like there's this trailer now that they just conveniently released right after this movie that's about a civil war breaking out in the United States. And
Yeah.
so like this has like everyone just kind of like, what is going on? Is something coming? Are they preparing us for something? So it's like everyone is on the same page now where it's like maybe we need to seriously start prepping for some impending doom. And that like sounds, haha, whatever, until you start to see like what the elites are doing. Okay. So, according to an article in The Independent, quote, Britain's Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden has warned the public that they should buy candles, torches, and battery powered radios in the event of a crisis cutting power supplies. The senior Tory cabinet minister said Britons should be more personally resilient, and he suggested they were too dependent on devices activated by the internet. And a National Resilience Academy will be launched to help people and businesses prepare for future pandemics, natural disasters, and cyber attacks. Like, what the fuck? So he goes on to say that the government will also develop a new volunteer hub aimed at helping authorities draw on a single pool of volunteers who want to help in future events similar to the COVID pandemic. It sure sounds like they are fairly certain that something big is coming. And I'm sorry, but like when the deputy prime minister is doomsday prepping, that's not a good sign. And you know who else is doomsday prepping? Billionaire Mark Zuckerberg. And this really freaked me out. Okay. He is spending over $100 million building an underground bunker in Hawaii on his compound called Kailua Ranch. And this is turning out to be the most expensive renovation in modern history. Okay. This underground like encampment has 12 buildings and it's going to contain its own food and energy sources. And it has like this vast tunnel system with blast resistant concrete and steel doors. Like, does he know something that we don't? I mean, that's not normal behavior. And I mean, Tara, like, doesn't that freak you out? Like, billionaires and prime ministers are doomsday prepping. I think we need to start paying attention and doing some prepping ourselves. Like, don't you think?
Well, it's funny you say that because on Friday, an article came out in News Nation, and it was talking about how doomsday prepping is like totally becoming a thing. And in addition to Mark Zuckerberg, it mentioned that OpenAI co-founder Sam Altman, along with celebrities Ryan Seacrest and Josh Duhamel, however you say his name, they're totally into prepping. And there's a ton of people that are buying properties in places that they're calling bunker communities. And this article was focused on a former Army base turned bunker community in South Dakota called Vivos X Point. And a correspondent for News Nation went out there and he met with a representative of the community. And the guy said, quote, "We have a lot of ex-military. We have an awful lot of ex-law enforcement. We've got people who are teachers. Some people live out here and they telecommute and do their jobs right out of their bunkers," end quote. So this property in South Dakota has more than 530 bunkers on it. It's built to be totally self-sufficient. The article said that some people have like a plane full of gas to get them to their bunkers at any moment. Some of the bunkers have generators, bomb blast doors, gun safes, electrical rooms, storage for food, bedrooms, bathrooms, the whole thing. They cost around $55,000 and 200 of them have already been sold. And reportedly, like sales are picking up and people want these bunkers. And the article was also talking about a study on finder.com that reported 39% of millennials and 40% of Gen Zers reported spending money on prepping in the last year, and roughly a third of adults in the United States dropped upwards of $11 billion in the past year on emergency preparedness. And then I read another article from Fox News that came out a couple days ago that was also referencing this study. And according to Drew Miller, the CEO of a company called Fortitude Collapse Preparedness and Fortitude Ranch, and then another guy, Patrick McCall, who's the president of the McCall Risk Group, they're both saying that the 2024 presidential election is a motivating factor for people on both sides of the political aisle to get into doomsday prepping. Why? Due to concerns of a possible civil war if the elections go bad. And then Fox News also interviewed someone called Breck Wagoneer. I guess this person's a millennial who runs a YouTube channel called Sustainable Prepping. And Breck said, quote, "I think for the first time, a lot of millennials and Gen Zers are realizing how fragile our systems are. We've grown up in a time in which technology has meant we've had grocery stores that were always stocked. You can get anything from Amazon in 24 hours. Then all of a sudden, the pandemic and now some uncertainties in our national and international politics has made us rethink how all these systems are not as stable as we assumed," end quote.
Yeah, that's very true. And
Yep.
I mean, just think about it though. Like, even if there isn't some crazy event or war breaking out, there's still a lot of practical reasons to have supplies in case of emergency, since the Biden administration is continually attacking like pretty much every basic convenience, like heating our homes in the winter, for example. And according to Reuters, more than half of the US and parts of Canada, home to around 180 million people, could fall short of electricity during extreme cold again this winter due to lacking natural gas infrastructure. And this is according to NERC, or the North American Electric Reliability Corp. And I'm sorry, but like this is absolutely insane considering we just did that episode where Biden announced that he's committed to cutting back on energy at that climate summit last week when we can't even sustain what we're currently doing. And I just feel like it's moving us backward in time. Like not even backward a decade, but backward like a century to where we can't even reliably heat homes in the winter and blackouts are on the horizon. I mean, they've been pretty upfront about that. And the article went on to say that there's just not enough natural gas pipeline and infrastructure to serve all the gas generation in certain big areas. So demand is greater than supply, which likely means that rates are going to hike again at a time when people truly can't afford it. So it's like, I feel like even just in a regular circumstance, you should have supplies on hand because what happens when there is a blackout or your heat's not working? You want to be able to like survive just all this crazy shit that this administration's putting forth.
Yeah, and I just want to talk about one story I read last week, just from the perspective of like the chaos of a blackout or a cyber attack or whatever, because this story just kind of emphasizes how completely unprepared we are and completely dependent we are. So I guess last Friday, there was a power outage in New York, and it was due to an incident at a Con Edison plant in Brooklyn. And the article that I read in express.com described it as chaos because you had people trapped in elevators and trapped on the subway. And they said people all over the city were furious and they were going on social media to complain. And now, mind you, this power outage was 20 minutes. 20 fucking minutes, and it caused, quote, chaos. So, how are people going to cope when it is a true crisis? And I do have to mention though, because there was one comment I read where someone posted, quote, NYC power outage just happened while I was halfway through the new Netflix movie, Leave the World Behind. Wife and I are freaked the fuck out. And I
Well,
was
yeah,
like,
because you start
totally.
thinking, like, what if we're being attacked or what is this an EMP attack? And, like, here's the thing with the bunkers is like, I, occasionally I'll come across these videos of like serious doomsday preppers, and they always say how quickly chaos will erupt. So they're like, don't go anywhere. Like, you need to stay home. So, for all these people that have bunkers, like, unless you're living in the bunker, getting on a plane and flying to South Dakota and like getting to the bunker is probably more dangerous than just staying put in your house. And if there's a nuclear war, I don't really want to live through that in a bunker, anyways, because like, what kind of a life is that? So, it's just like, to me, it's kind of like stupid, but it's crazy at the same time. And okay, so like, first of all, for any of you astrology people out there, it's Mercury retrograde right now, which could explain some of this crazy shit happening. Like, I mean, Tara, like there's been all kinds of crazy stuff happening with me over the past week or so. Well, NASA recorded the biggest solar flare that's been reported in years. And apparently, this also happened like right after that movie came out, and it knocked out like radio signals for a few hours. So it's like all these crazy things are all happening at the same time. And it's just wild. It's like, what is going on here? Is it Mercury retrograde? Like, is the world falling apart? I don't like it. It's making me like very anxious. Um, and then on top of all of that, we talked about last week how the cyber attack from China like hit the US and it's been going on for like a year, but they just recently found out about it. Well, the Washington Post did a whole piece on this, and it said that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence did a threat assessment, and it warned that China, quote, almost certainly is capable of launching cyber attacks that would disrupt US critical infrastructure, including oil and gas pipelines and rail systems. So, if Beijing feared that there's going to be a major conflict with the United States, it almost certainly would consider undertaking aggressive cyber operations against the US homeland, critical infrastructure, and military assets worldwide. This is coming from that article. Does not feel very good to read that. Then you've got this guy, Joe McReynolds, who is a China Security Studies Fellow at Jamestown Foundation, and he told the Post, quote, Chinese military officers have described in internal documents how they might use cyber tools or network warfare. He said military strategists speak of synchronizing air and missile strikes with disruption of command and control networks, critical infrastructure, satellite networks, and military logistics systems. That sure sounds a lot like this movie where like even the satellites go down. And while we know China's been focused on Hawaii and Guam, I guess that Chinese hackers also tried breaking into the Texas power grid. And it didn't really say if they were successful or not. And I think they still don't know, like, if they're in there or not, which is really creepy because that controls the energy for the entire state of Texas. And then a top mobile internet company in Ukraine also faced a cyber attack last week. This was from Russia. And I saw like all of these TikToks where Ukrainians were saying that they couldn't access their bank, they couldn't get any money out. And again, like it just feels like so much is building up around the world and just leading us further and further into conflict. And it's really it's time to like I don't feel like we could just ignore this and hope for the best. I feel like people need to pay attention and just be on alert and prepare most of all. Um, so with all this being said, I don't know if I'm going to make a mountain out of a molehill or whatever that saying is, but our government does seem concerned because when they go to pass the annual National Defense Authorization Act for military aid, they're now citing China as the main reason why there's an increase in the budget. So they ended up approving $886 billion for 2024, which will be used for Ukraine. No surprise there. But the other big reason was to push back on Chinese presence in the Indo-Pacific, which is a 3% increase over last year in the budget. They also put forth a 5.2% raise for military members, which is the largest in a decade. So, in one of the articles that I read, it said, quote, enacting the NDAA has never been more vital than today. This is from the House Armed Services Committee Chairman Mike Rogers. And he also went on to say that America and our allies face unprecedented and rapidly evolving threats from China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and terrorist organizations throughout the world, end quote. Okay, so I like started freaking out when I was reading this because again, this is like right after I'm watching that movie and there's like a cyber attack. And I mean, I had to remind myself, we do these military budgets annually. That is nothing new. Like every year it has to get passed. But does it strike you as odd that they're citing China and the Indo-Pacific as a main reason for the increase? Meanwhile, like they said nothing about Israel, and Biden is now like softening his support on Israel. And it makes me wonder, like, is something happening with China that we don't know about, that they're not releasing to the public? And like we find out there's this ongoing cyber attack. Now there's this budget that gets easily passed, by the way, with bipartisan support. And then all of a sudden, the Biden administration is shifting its focus off of Israel and onto China. Like something just doesn't feel right. But maybe it's because I just watched that movie. So what do you think, Tara? Like, am I being paranoid? Should I blame leaving the world behind, or is this a legitimate concern?
Well, you know that I have a conspiracy theory brain just like yours. And honestly, like when there's bipartisan agreement so quickly on any kind of budget lately, I feel like it warrants paying attention. And
Right?
but if I'm trying to come from a logic perspective of preparedness, from all the stuff that I read, like one of the provisions of this NDAA that was passed by both the Senate and the House is called the Islands Forum Partnership Act. And it's a bill that was introduced by Senator John Kennedy and co-sponsored by 20 other members of Congress. And it basically creates like a special envoy to the Pacific Islands Forum, which is an international organization of Australia, New Zealand, and Pacific Island nations. And these are all nations that are strategically located in the Indo-Pacific region and are facing threats from China in terms of like economic, cybersecurity, and military concerns. And the Associated Press reported that this bill also establishes a new training program with Taiwan to accelerate deliveries of Harpoon anti-ship missiles to Taiwan. And there's some kind of agreement enabling Australia to access nuclear-powered submarines. And so the Washington Times reported this past weekend that US forces in the Pacific are increasing these multinational military exercises, and they're growing in number and in scale. They keep adding more foreign participants, and that all of this is in response to China's growing military power. So there's joint patrols taking place in the South China Sea and the East China Sea with French and Canadian warships. And for the first time ever, Australia joined the 2-week annual military exercise that just took place last week with the United States and Japan. And the article was saying that like there's places like Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and other Pacific Island nations that have not taken sides at all in the past, but growing concerns about China are pushing the armed forces of these nations to rely more on US security and support to push back against Chinese maritime aggression. And I guess there's also an ongoing issue as of last week with the Philippines, where the China is making all these threats against the Philippines in like waters that are controversial. You know, is it China? Is it Philippines? But like, I don't know that any of this is comforting, right? So Fox News reported on Saturday that the US ambassador to China, his name is Nicholas Burns, he said on Friday that he doesn't, quote, feel optimistic, end quote, about the future of US-China relations, and that China is the United States' most consequential relationship for the next couple of decades. And he said, quote, we're the two leading economies in the world and will be into the 2030s and 2040s. We're the two most powerful militaries in the world and certainly will be for the next 2 decades. We're the two countries with the widest global reach if you think about the economic, societal, political, strategic breadth that most countries have, and we're vying for global power as well as regional power. So yes, I do think there's probably a lot more going on with China than we know about, especially since the focus has been aid to Ukraine, aid to Ukraine, aid to
Mhm.
Ukraine. And
Yep.
now we're throwing in this money and saying, oh, it's because of China.
Well, I keep thinking about, first of all, you had mentioned Canada. And again, on TikTok, there was a news report of a Canadian plane, or like, what do you call them? Jet, whatever. And the China like came in and they were within 15 feet of this Canadian plane. Like they weren't fucking around. It was scary to watch. And I just every time I like read stuff on China, I just keep picturing Antony Blinken's face and hit the way he responded during that China meeting. And I know it's like funny, but it's also terrifying because it's like, when do you ever see someone that nervous? Like something
Right.
happened at that meeting that scared the shit out of him. And like now all this stuff is happening and it's really concerning. I don't have a good feeling about any of it.
That's why Nicholas Burns was saying, he was like, yes, we just had this meeting with China and it seemed like, you know, things are going well. But he still said, despite that, I don't feel optimistic about the future of US-China relations.
Right.
So is that concerning? Absolutely. But I do want to mention on a separate note that according to Mike Rogers, this new defense bill also includes provisions banning critical race theory and like saying that promotions are going to be based on merit. But I guess a lot of Republicans voted against the bill, even though it passed, you know, bipartisan passing. A lot of Republicans voted against it because it didn't include any restrictions on gender affirming healthcare for transgender service members. And it didn't block the Pentagon's abortion travel policy, which apparently allows reimbursement for travel expenses for service members if they have to travel out of state to get an abortion. So I guess we're making some progress with this bill, but
You
who
know,
knows?
it's interesting because I feel like out of all of this, the one silver lining is I think a lot of people on the left are starting to realize why we have things or why we did have things in place the way that they were. I know I watched Barry Weiss, who was one of the authors that she's always been on the left, but she was one of the Twitter Files reporters. And she was talking with these like other liberal guys. And again, like they've always voted left, they've always been liberal. And they were talking about the state of the world and Trump. And like the one guy was like, Trump is arrogant. He's an asshole. He's mean. He's unprofessional. I don't like the way he speaks. I don't like the way he looks. And he's just going on and on and on. And he said, but every other country in the world feared him and they saw him as a strong leader and they did not mess with him. And he's like, I think we're getting a wake up call as to why we need that. And like, yeah, in this great, wonderful world, we wouldn't need that, but that's not where we are. And he's like, so now I'm realizing like why we need someone who's an asshole and that everyone fears because strength, it keeps you safe.
Yeah.
And so I feel like people are starting to realize that, but like again, it's probably going to be a little too late. Like, are they going to realize in time? And like with the military, it's like, yeah, maybe instead of focusing on, equity and transgender in the military, we should just focus on people who are good and can do the work and are like physically equipped to go in these war zones and defend our country. So, I mean, I think it's going to take scary stuff like this, though, to wake people up.
You know what's sad though? It's like military recruitment is still, it's down.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, they've totally tarnished their
yes.
image.
And I don't know if you saw this, but there's this whole issue on TikTok right now because there's an army guy on TikTok, and he's an influencer. And he's basically like, I guess his name is Anthony Laster, and he recently slammed the army for having like no privacy, and the pay sucks, and the food is shitty, and the leadership's disrespectful, and they're not getting any sleep. And he had like 600,000 views. And then he has like more than 1 million followers on TikTok. And he's making all these claims in uniform. And it just like, I'm sorry, we look like fucking retards. Like our military looks absolutely ridiculous to the end of the world. End of the world. See where my mind is? End of the
Yep.
world. To the rest of the world. And then there was another like Gen Z person on there that was complaining about that they have to meet training standards and pass physical agility tests. And it's like, I'm sorry, our military is just fucking disgraceful. And now it's like
Yeah,
it's all over there. The fact that they're all over TikTok complaining about being in the military when it's a voluntary military, and it's not even like other countries where you're forced to join the military. This is straight
right.
up voluntary, and this is the representation of America. It's really disturbing.
Well, this is what happens when you demasculate a society. When men aren't allowed to be men and you're shamed for being strong and having resilience and all of these things, that's what happens. You get people that can't do it and that are
Yeah.
soft and that are weak and that complain and want to just, like be lazy and live in their parents' basement or whatever. Like it's
You
it's
know
pretty
who's
frightening.
not, yeah, you know who's not on TikTok complaining about the military? Anyone from
China.
China's military. Yeah,
Yeah. China doesn't even have the same TikTok. They like learn like
I
math and
know.
shit on their
Yeah,
TikTok. It's just crazy. We are like, I mean, they have screwed this country up
I
so
know.
badly in such a short amount of time. I mean,
Yep.
think about like when Trump was in office, think about how many people were like so proud to be Americans and would like go and fight for him and our country without question compared to now. You think
Yeah.
like Biden is really getting anyone in the patriotic mood to go and fight other nations? No, like they've completely destroyed things in 3 years. It's absolutely astonishing, really.
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned like recruitment before, but the article that I was reading, it was a Daily Mail article that was talking about this whole influencer, but it was saying that the Army expects to fall 15,000 short of its recruitment target for 2023, and the Navy is 10,000 personnel short. Like those are big numbers. I'm sorry, those are pretty big numbers.
Yeah, it really is. And can I just say one more thing? I don't know if it'll comfort you or terrify you. It terrified me, but I feel like we've always got to end the episode on a terrifying note. I mean, come
I
on.
know.
So something that I caught it, but it didn't really sink in until I watched it again on Leave the World Behind. Okay, so the part where Julia Roberts and George, like the homeowner, are like sitting at the table drinking wine, and he's talking about like his rich elite friend that, they get a heads up basically, but that's it. If something's going to happen, like the apocalypse. And then he says this thing where he's like, the truth is, there's no one in control. There's no one pulling the puppet strings. And then they paused. They did not say anything. Like they were trying to get that to sink in. And I was thinking, if Obama's the executive producer, is he sending a message that, like, hey, I know everyone thinks I'm pulling the puppet strings and like there's behind the scenes, it's really not Joe Biden, but like, what if it is? What if it is? And there really is no sane person in control. Like, I'm sorry, that's terrifying if it really is the case. And maybe it is, or maybe he put that there to trick us. But I'm like, what the hell? Like, maybe there is no normal person holding things together right now. And it really is Biden just doing all this crazy shit and everyone's just going along with it. Like, how scary is that?
That would be utterly frightening. I mean,
Yeah,
it's scary enough to think like the Cobb Mafia is in control,
right.
but
But it's
wait,
better than thinking it's just Biden.
yes, yes, exactly. It is. It is like, that's, oh my God. Yeah.
I
I,
know. I know.
and I was out of town all weekend, so I haven't had a chance to rewatch it, but I'm still planning to rewatch that for all the symbolism.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, that's what's happening in the world. And I know it sucks and like I hate to be like a Debbie Downer, but I was listening to this like great speech that Tucker Carlson gave and he was like, "You guys, we can't just keep our head in the sand. Like we can't do it's so irresponsible to do that. You've got to pay attention. You've got to prepare. You've got to stay informed." And he's right. Like we need to know and we should be prepared because again, even if it's not doomsday, there's a lot of stuff that they're saying. They're flat out saying is going to happen like next year with blackouts and all these different things that we should definitely have like some basic supplies and like skills that we learn to just freaking get through it because it's not looking pretty. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
again, I'm sorry if you have the Deputy Prime Minister of Britain saying, people start preparing, like,
And not
that's
just saying they're putting money into this. They have like task force
yeah.
things going on and then like
Yeah.
volunteer programs. Like he knows something. And yeah, it's like we need to start paying attention. Otherwise, you're going to get to that point and you're going to wish you were like the Kevin Bacon and you're going to be the Julia Roberts with your head in the sand. So pay attention, everybody. Go to Costco and stock up, stockpile. All right. Well, happy Monday. I guess on Wednesday, this means we'll have to find something a little more fun to talk about and not so scary.
Come
Um,
on, this is fun though. This
I
is
think it's fun. It's still
fun.
fun. It's
It's we have to make
terrifyingly
it fun.
fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll find something good for Wednesday and maybe we'll watch the movie another time and find more things in there. But everyone have a good start to your weekend.